guys in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 2080. Yay! We are on a genealogy time machine tonight. Which era would you visit? We're going to go over some eras in different countries from different time periods and different countries to see some of the stuff that you could visit if you had a genealogy time machine to go back. I'm going to add one more. Not only what era would you visit, but who in your ancestry would you visit as well? So which ancestor or relative would you go back and visit? So let's pull up the list and see where we're going. So we're going on a multi-country journey through history, imagination, and family life. And first of all, let me apologize for being on so late. I was snoozing. I had a snooze. I didn't wake up in time. I apologize. Completely my fault. But anyway, and the other thing that I like about this is that we get a little bit of time for the weather to cool down, because last I checked it was 99 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 38 degrees Celsius. It's been a warm day. It was meant to be 101 today, and yeah. So if it cools down a little more, the sun goes down, then hopefully the heat will dissipate a little more quickly too. Anyway, so here we go. Welcome to your genealogy time machine. Tonight we explore what life might have been like if you could visit an ancestor. We're going to look at the 1880s, the 1920s, the 1940s, and the late 1800s immigration era. We're going to touch on the life in the US, England, Scotland, Australia, and New Zealand. So let's look. Era 1, 1980s, frontier and industrial life. So in the United States, you had covered wagons, westward migration, farming, and blacksmithing. There was open hearth cooking, soap and candle making, few possessions, long travel times, hand sewn clothing. Does that sound like fun to go visit? Just think of all those, you see those covered wagons on TV and things. What I did not realize, and I was actually in a car museum one time, I did not realize how small those covered wagons were. When you see them on TV, they look a lot bigger than what they actually were. And then when you see them in real life, it's like, oh, they're really tiny. And having to ride on those covered wagons or even walk next to them, the men would be driving the teams of horses. In some cases, women would be as well. But a lot of women and children would spend the day walking. And there'd be times that they may be able to sit in the wagon out of the heat of the sun as they kept walking as well. But they were all moving westward with all the different things that were going on. There was farming and blacksmithing, two very tough jobs. And everything was cooked over an open fire. Some people were doing candle making and soap making as well. They had very few possessions. They traveled long travel times, and they hand sewed everything. Yeah, they didn't. I don't think they had. I'm not sure when the first sewing machine came out, but in those days it was needle and thread in the hands. In England and Scotland, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing with coal mines, factories, and railways, crowded city housing and pollution, and growing urban centers, strong church influence, and community structure. So there's another one that you can go visit as well. In Australia at that time, despite the convicts were becoming settlers, with bush life was rugged and wild. There was the gold rush in Ballarat and Bendigo. Women often ran businesses like laundries or inns, and folk heroes like bushrangers roamed the countryside. Yes, who's a bushranger? They were the bad guys. In New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi was signed on the 6th of February 1840. So just outside this era, but still. And that was a treaty between the Maori and the Europeans, otherwise known as the Pakeha. And so it was early colonial settlement going on. It was rugged, it was isolated, and still developing. The Maori and the Pakeha relationships shaped trade and culture during that time. There was dense bush to clear. Settlers lived off the land. Horseback or foot travel was the only way to travel, and roads were still in development. So if you wanted to get from point A to point B, you either walked it or you had a horse and rode it. Moving forward to the 1920s, so post-World War I and the Jazz Age, the United States jazz clubs, flappers, speakeasies, Prohibition era, that was all going on during that time. Yeah, it was it was a very interesting time, let me tell you, especially with the speakeasies. I've never seen one, but I have heard of them, and I have seen photographs of them. And it could be, a house where they have this is why I love secret rooms. I love houses that have secret passages, have secret rooms. And some of the houses were building these speakeasies, which was like you would have to go through the bookcase. The bookcase was the door or something, and go through down a tunnel of some sort. And then you'd open to this big room, which would be the speakeasy, and it would be set up like a bar. And this is where the gentlemen would go and spend their time so they could get their drink and everything else. It was during Prohibition. No alcohol was allowed. Alaska went through Prohibition before continental US did. And they were under US rule at the time. They were a territory at the time of the US when Alaska went into Prohibition, and they were kind of sneaky on their stuff. But they were charging 50 cents a nip, and a nip was half a teaspoon. That was not a lot. It cost you $1. And so translating that from 50 cents a nip back then to today's money is about $10.58 today for half a teaspoon of booze. If you want a full teaspoon, double it. True story. Women were voting and entering the workforce in the 1920s. Economic boom before the Great Depression. So everything was happening. Everything was looking good. Everything was looking great. In England and Scotland, post-World War I recovery, many men lost in the war. There was strikes, poverty, and strong working class identity. Dance halls and radios brought fun for the bleak times. In Australia, you had the veterans returned to limited opportunities. Urban pride with mixed with rural hardship. ANZAC, which is the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, identity forming, nationalism on the rise. That also happened in New Zealand with the Anzacs as well, coming back as well. Those guys brought back a lot of pride in who they were and what they had done. Even though they didn't win the battle they'd gone over to fight, they were still very proud of what they'd done. New Zealand was proud of women's suffrage. They achieved in 1893 where they gave women the right to vote. They were the first self-governing country in the world to give women the power, allowing women to vote. They gave women the power of vote in 1893. US didn't do it till the 1920s. Just to keep you going on there. Tight-knit rural communities with British influence. We had a lot of British people coming in and helping colonize the country. Very tight-knit rural communities. There are still to this day very tight rural communities in some areas. You've got some farms that have been handed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. Rugby, great sport to watch. Farming and faith defined daily life. That's how people worked. There was rugby, farming, and their faith is how a lot of things started. And electricity started to reach homes in the 1920s. The 1920s. If we fast forward to the 1940s, you've got war at home and abroad. In the United States, you had World War II life with rationing, victory gardens, and defense industry jobs. Women working outside the home in large numbers. Basically, because the men were off fighting, the women were having to keep the fires burning at home that way. Patriotism, but also fear and uncertainty. What was happening? What was going on? You had World War II was in lots of different areas. It was in Europe. It was in the South. It was in the Pacific. There was a lot of stuff going on. In Scotland and England, you had the Blitz with evacuations and ration books, blackout curtains, and nightly bombing raids. Can you imagine living through bombing, snuggling down into bed for a good night's sleep, and the next thing you've got the sirens going off. You've got to go shelter wherever you've got, wherever your shelter is at home, and taking cover. The families were split for safety. Children were sent to the countryside to keep them safe and out of the cities. In Australia, the Japanese attacked Darwin, which brought the war to home soil. US soldiers stationed in Australian cities. Land, army, and volunteer efforts filled the labour gap. In New Zealand, troops deployed to Europe and the Pacific. Home Guard, war bonds, and agriculture carried the country. Communities pulled together through rationing and self-reliance. There's a lot of inventions that came out of New Zealand. Can you tell them, proud? Just because of the fact we didn't have what we needed, or something that came in from overseas wasn't quite what we needed, so we just made our own. It was that simple. We also had the US soldiers stationed in New Zealand as well to help protect us from many Japanese invasions. In fact, somewhere around there is my sewing basket, and don't know why it's in my sewing basket, but I know it's in my sewing basket. But there is a newspaper article that I got from my grandmother from World War II that talked about how close a Japanese submarine got to the coast of New Zealand. It's a whole lot. I still have the article. It was all cut out and everything else. And somehow, I don't know how, but I ended up with a copy of this article, which is really fascinating about this Japanese sub that was seen off the coast of New Zealand. It never got to land, but it got close. Let's fast forward to the late 1800s. Immigration, leaving everything behind. General immigration experience, long cramped voyages and steerage, few belongings. There was language barriers, very little money, emotional goodbyes, often permanent. You didn't know if you were going to see your loved ones anymore. In the United States, settled in crowded cities or staked land in the Midwest. Factory, farms, and railroads offered work. Cultural enclaves formed like Irish, Italian, and German neighborhoods. When you go into some of the big cities, there'll be like the Irish were over here, the Italians were over here, the German were over here. There was a lot of moving around. In Australia, immigrants worked on sheep stations and gold fields or railways. They had a harsh climate and long distance between town. In Australia, if you look at any map, most of the population lives on the outskirt of the continent of Australia. The inside is basically desert and it can take you days to get through. Yes, there are the occasional town that you will go through, but it's a lot of long driving to get anywhere. Now, if you want to play golf on the way across Australia, you go down. If you're going east to west, you start in Adelaide, and between Adelaide and Perth, there is an 18-hole golf course. And what's really cool is you play one hole, and at the end of your hole, when you get there, it says next tee in 63 miles. 63 kilometers. I kid you not. There is an 18. If you want to go Google it, Google, what's the name of the things? Just Google the golf course between Perth and Adelaide or Adelaide and Perth. It doesn't matter which way you play it. It just tells you at the end of your hole how many kilometers to the next hole. So yes, you had harsh climates and long distance between towns. Many built lives from nothing with few safety nets. I tell you, being down under by ourselves down there, you had to figure out how to do stuff. Australia and New Zealand, we're both down there. And a lot of the times we had to build things from nothing because we had no safety nets. We didn't have anybody that could come and bail us out. We had to figure it out for ourselves. In New Zealand, you had farming and bush clearing work dominated, lived in temporary huts or cottages while building homes, coexisted sometimes tensely with their Maori neighbors, and rugged, physically demanding life. I mean, New Zealand's pretty mountainous and that sort of thing. There is some flat space in there, but, So out of those eras, which era calls to you? What ancestor would you visit? Could you handle their daily life? And what would they think of you? Think about that. Because you may turn up there in your jeans and t-shirt and sneakers and a jacket, and they're going to look at you like, what the hell are you wearing? What strange clothes are these? Just think of all the time travel movies and how they appear in modern day dress back in some time period somewhere, and the looks that they get because of how they're dressed. They think that they are strange people. Yes, very much so. So ask yourself, which era calls to you? So are you wanting to go to the 1850s, frontier and industrial life, the 1920s, post-war and jazz age, the 1940s, war at home and abroad, or the late 1800s with immigration and leaving everything behind? Which era would you like to visit? Actually, that jazz one, where is it? The jazz one for the 1920s. That reminds me of the book that I am currently listening to. I love to listen to audiobooks, especially when the person the book is about is the person who is narrating the book. Now, I've been following for a number of years. He's what, 80? How old is he? Like 83, 84 now. But he wrote this book. This book came out. Oh, when did this book come out? Hang on. Title details. He was born in. Oh no, he was 15 in 1956. This was released in 2023, in November of 2023. Actually, hang on. September of 2023, this book was released. The book is called A Head Full of Music, The Soundtrack to My Life. The author is Cliff Richard, well, actually Sir Cliff Richard. He is an entertainer who has been in the music industry for 60, actually, when he did this in 23, he'd been in 65 years in the music industry. Yeah, he's been going longer than the Rolling Stones, as an FYI. But and longer than the Beatles when they started. But he has been a pop rock singer since back in 1956, 57, 56, 57, I think it was. Anyway, he's going to be 85 this year. He is still doing sold out concerts. 85 years old, still doing it. They called him the Peter Pan of pop at one point because he looked like he never aged. But the book is called Head Full of Music. And what he does is that he is narrating, he's telling his life story through music. He's already written several books about his life. There's been a lot of books written about his life. The US may not have heard of him because he is very popular everywhere else in the world except the US. For some reason, he never took off in the US, but Canadians might know of him. He's definitely big in Britain because he's Brit. Definitely big in New Zealand. It was the very first concert I went to see was a Cliff Richard concert. Absolutely loved it. Fabulous guy. And he talks about in this book the musical influences that have been in his life as he's gone through from when he started in the music industry up until today. He talks about the people along the way that he has met, the singers that he has not met, the ones he regrets not meeting when he had the opportunity. And he talks about some of the songs that came out during that time, why he liked those songs. And the book title, A Head Full of Music, is actually a lyric from one of his songs called Wired for Sound. Walking around with a head full of music. No, I'm not going to sing for you. I can't do it as well as he does. But he talks about how rock and roll started with Elvis Presley. He is a huge Elvis Presley fan. And then all the different rock and roll people that came along the way behind Elvis Presley. Like, they said that he was kind of like the first one to hit. Was he the first to go into Britain? I'm just really enjoying this thing because this guy is mentioning so many songs, and I'm like, that song, how does that song go? So I've got to pause at times to think about the song that he's talking about because the name might sound familiar. I'm like, how does that song go? And I'll sit there and I'll start, and then he might give a lyric, like a couple of lines of it, and it's like, oh, I don't remember that one. Oh, I do remember that one though. And he talks about a lot of the different rock and roll singers from back in the late 50s and from the 50s into the 60s, into the 70s and so forth, and about how their careers developed, who he got to meet along the way, some of the people he's been able to sing with, and things like that. But it's just his life through music, which is totally awesome. Absolutely really enjoying this book. So just thought I'd mention it since I saw the thing there about jazz, and he's doing, he was actually the first British singer to be on the British charts as a rock and roll singer. He was the first rock and roll singer from Britain on the British charts. So he has that claim to fame that nobody can take from him. So anyway, but he talks a lot about his life and how music is wound into his life. And he's literally walking around with a head full of music. It's just it's an incredible book. Probably about, I don't even know how far. Let's see. Total play time is 9 hours and 38 minutes, and I've got 3 hours and 37 minutes left. So I'm a third of the way through, but totally and utterly enjoying this book, especially since it's a singer I've been following for years. He was the first guy I saw in concert. I've seen him in concert twice. Yeah, twice. Yeah, had a blast at his concerts. They're awesome. He comes out in this really cool white shirt that looks amazing. And then he's like singing to everybody. He's always pointing front as he's moving around the stage as he's singing a song or something. Right at the end of the song, he turns around and goes like this. On the back of his shirt in rhinestones was the kiwi bird. It was, everybody just went wild. The place was already wild anyway. Everybody took it up to another level. But yeah, he even talks about how when he's playing different concerts, the reception that he and his band would get. And he started off with Cliff Richard and the Drifters, but then they got a cease and desist letter from the US stating, you can't be called the Drifters. We already have a band called the Drifters here. You can't use that one. And so they became Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And so he talks about that transition as well, and the reception they would get when they would go out on stage and everything else. And when they did these big US tours, they did these tours around the US in the late 50s, early 60s. And some of the people that they traveled with, and him and his band would get the biggest thing every time. But for some reason, he just never took off in the US. And I've heard Wired for Sound in some of the stores and stuff as you're walking around and things. But anyway, that's it. I'm out of here. So which of those eras would you, total sidetrack, I know. I'm tired. I need to take Zephy for a walk and then get something for dinner. Got to figure that out. So out of those eras we looked at today, which ones would you want to visit, and who in your ancestry do you want to visit in that particular era? So think about that. Put your answers down in the comments. Please remember to go to the YouTube channel to leave your comments there on the videos, because in 30 days, Facebook's going to wipe this one out of existence. So we're putting them all on YouTube over there. There's a good bunch of them over there. So just go leave your comments there on YouTube, and we will respond there. So go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. And I promise to be more on time.